Welcome to In All Honesty, the podcast where we get real about life and all the problems that come with it. I'm Michelle Elman, and I'm that friend who we all know is a little bit too honest. You might not come to me when you get back together with your ex, but I'll be there for you when it all goes tits up. I've decided on this podcast every once in a while I'm going to bring a co-host, usually one of my friends, on, and we're going to chat about things so you don't just have to listen to my voice. Sofie Hagen.
Yay, thank you.
Do you want to introduce yourself?
My name is Sofie Hagen.
Well
I'm
done.
a stand-up comedian, an author, a podcaster, content creator, all-around nice guy.
And most recent book is...
I wrote a book called Will I Ever Have Sex Again, which is about what stands between us and sex. So like what makes it difficult to have sex.
Also, on this podcast, we love heavily promoting people because I think people should shout their accomplishments from the rooftop. So also go listen to Sophie's podcast.
I also have a
Help Hole.
podcast called Help Hole. I
Yes.
forget that sometimes. I have to, on my tour, I also do stand-up. I'm often on tour. I had to write, like, you have a podcast on my hand, so I remember to tell the audience.
So that's all the promotional stuff. The reason why you are here, though, is because you wrote a hate comment
Yeah, I trolled you.
on my social media
Yeah.
where I basically said you shouldn't text your ex, and Sophie disagrees.
Yeah, I was like, Michelle, you piece of shit.
So-
Because I'd forgotten that I wasn't on my burner account.
So the post was saying, if you
read the post to them.
Good idea.
I'm the co-host. I get to decide. Read the whole thing.
This is why you are my co-host.
Yeah.
So I posted saying, the solution to not text your ex is to do anything else. Call your friends, go on dating apps, do the laundry, reply to emails, go for a walk. It's okay to miss companionship, but they are no longer a safe person to turn to. The feeling is going to exist, but you get to control your actions. Act like a person who loves themselves, and they wouldn't put themselves in harm's way. And that is what texting him would do. He has... I'm so bad at reading. I'm so dyslexic.
I can read it, and I can read it in your tone.
No, I'll pass the phone.
I
in
can
2
do your
seconds. I've got
accent.
one more sentence. Okay, you want to go? Okay, Sophie's going to read what I wrote.
This is what Michelle said. The solution to not text your ex is to do anything else. Is that
Is that
correct?
my
I
accent?
think so. I'm not sure.
Keep going.
I call my friends. I go on dating apps. I do the laundry. Is that how you sound? I'm not good.
You're actually doing quite a good job.
Yeah.
You do sound like
I
me.
reply to emails. I go for a walk. It's okay to miss companionship, but this is this is no longer a safe person to turn to. The feeling is going to exist, but you get to control your actions. Act like a person who loves themselves, and they wouldn't put themselves in harm's way. And it's going a bit Essex now, isn't it? And that is what texting him would do. He has proven he will hurt me. So no, he doesn't get a text.
Okay, you need to now read your response because
In
I'm
my
not going to
accent.
try to do your
I'm gonna
accent.
and I'm going to do it in my accent, my original Danish accent. I wrote, ooh, I love this because I disagree. I always say, then text him, and text him all the stuff you want to say. There is nothing more sobering than 1, seeing yourself being a bit pathetic in writing on a screen, and 2, getting a disappointing reply back because the reply will be disappointing. You're texting a fantasy, and the real him will reply. For me, if I don't send the text, it becomes this what if kind of situation. I don't know, Michelle. Fascinating.
Why does your accent of yourself sound like you taking the piss of yourself?
This is my authentic Danish accent that I constantly suppress because it's so horrible.
So this is what you would actually sound like.
Yeah, my true self
Okay,
has a
so-
Danglish accent.
So going to that message, all I read from what you said was
I
touch-
disagree. That was it, and then you got mad.
You were like,
Like I'm
on
going to
the
start
podcast.
a podcast. So I asked you
It's the
about
fact that you're basically saying, touch the fire until you figure out it's hot.
this. Do you know what it is? I think in that moment I was reacting from a gut feeling that I wasn't quite sure about why it was there, and now I've had time to think. And there's several. And first of all, I don't necessarily think that either of us can come up with an answer that goes well for everyone. Right? Some things work for some people, some things work for other people. It very much depends on the relationship, the situation, your feelings, the ex, all those things. But most often when my friends come to me, and when I come to me with this issue, I lean towards texting them. Because, and stay with me for this one, based on everything I have learned from my eating disorder, stay with me, is that restriction makes the thing you are restricting yourself from, makes that into a much bigger thing, a much better thing. There's like forbidden fruit that it's rarely fruit, is it? There's forbidden chocolate that you're not allowed to have. And it becomes this, like, it grows and grows and grows in your brain until all you need is 1 week moment, right? You're drunk, you just do this little thing and you go, I'm just going to text him. And then it becomes 500 times worse than if you just send the text to begin with.
So what you're saying is your ex is a cookie and you need to have cookies in the house in order to not want to binge eat the cookies.
Yeah, because what happens, right? What happens? You're like, I want to text him, right? I want to text him. I shouldn't. In that situation, you're thinking, because all I want to do is I want to message him and I want to say, I miss you. And then he might reply. What if he then reply? What if he misses me too? He's going to reply. He's going to go, I miss you too. Oh my God, that would feel so good. No, I'm not going to text him. Oh my God, we could actually see each other right now. That's right. What happens in real life? You go, I want to text him, I miss him. Okay, I'm going to do that. I miss you. He's not going to reply for 3 hours. Ugh. Then he's going to reply, he's going to go, okay, cool.
Or he's not, and he's going to reply saying, I miss you too. And then you go down that path again.
And then you go down the path until he shows you the reason you left, right? There's a reason you're not with him.
Okay,
That's
so
because
you're
he's a
basically
disappointing
saying,
person.
let someone in your house, if they throw your vase on the floor, then give them another plate to throw on the floor. And if they throw the plate on the floor, then go give them your favorite object in the entire house and keep going until you're truly devastated and you have nothing in your house left anymore. That is what you're saying.
Let me just get into this metaphor. You have someone in your house and they break a vase. You then ask them to leave, right? You ask them to leave. That's what you did. You asked them to leave. And then a few months later, you're like, I really want them back in my house. Then you let them back in the house. They break another vase and you're like, okay, fuck off. That you can I swear?
Yes.
Okay. You say fuck off. Like, you broke, and you're like, why did I let this person into my house? Get out. And then you're like, but if you're in your head, you're like, I could invite them back. They probably wouldn't break anything. This time they'd be real nice about it. No, they wouldn't, because eventually they're going to break another vase.
Okay, but what if that vase is from your grandmother and you love your grandmother and you're never going to get it back? Like, that's your heart you're talking about. You're putting your heart in someone's hands who've hurt you. Like, why do you have to learn the lesson? You are basically saying, hurt yourself enough until you don't want to hurt yourself anymore.
I'm saying there is a reason you're no longer with this person.
Yes. Agree.
You have learned that they are this person. And the fantasy you have in your head, which I will say in a lot of relationships, is the reason that you don't leave immediately, right? It's because you keep having this, like, they could change. Or, like, maybe they're actually, like, you assume they're a really good person. You assume they're not. Like, you have this idea of them, and then often it breaks because you realize who they really are.
Yeah.
That will show, you can't unknow that. You can lie to yourself a bit about it. You can say, I miss you. He'll say, I miss you back. You get into this whole texting thing. And you can maybe lie to yourself, maybe he's changed.
Okay, so my only argument is to call you stupid, so I'm not going to do that. So I'm just going to tell you my point of view and hope to convince you the other way. But my point of view is, let's take my actual breakup. Because I also think the difference between texting an ex is, are you in the midst of a breakup?
Yes.
And are you 2 years out? That's two very different, am I texting my ex? I also think the word breakup, usually we think of it as that acute moment when someone says it's over. And I actually see a breakup as like the following months after. Like the period of breaking up and the period of detachment after a long-term relationship actually is quite a long period. Like him moving out, us cutting out contact, me ending it with his parents. Like there's actually quite a long time. So we broke up mid-April. We didn't stop speaking until maybe 3 weeks later because we had to move him out. We had to change the internet bill. There were lots of things we had to discuss. And many times in that first week, I actually actively called him, not talking about logistics, because there was so much I actually didn't know about the infidelity, and I wanted that information. And then it got to a point that I was like, okay, knowing more information is not helping me. Like, he cheated more than once. That's like the difference between 1 and 2 makes a difference in my mind. The difference between 2 and 25 makes no difference. Don't know how many it was. Don't really believe him when he tells me anymore. So that was like probably the first week. And then we had a week before we saw each other to swap the final bits of our stuff, where I said, I need now a week of space. And in that week, I had that, like, it's almost like a craving. And that's the part that needs to end. It's almost like the difference between love and attachment. That was just the breaking of the attachment. And the only way I got through it was knowing I was seeing him on the 3rd of May. And for that entire week, it was so hard to not text him, but I had to actually break that attachment. And then we saw each other. That was meant to be the final time we saw each other. It was the final time we saw each other. And then I said to him, stop texting me now. I don't like, in that week, he carried on texting me. I didn't reply. And after that, I said, stop texting me. For the next month, he carried on texting me until I eventually sent him a final text saying, hey, I've asked you politely to stop texting me multiple times. I never replied. But there was a point, and this is where I will agree with you, where every time I did text him, all of the replies were about him. Like, this is the worst week of my life. I don't know how I'll survive without you. And at some point, I remember it was actually on a call. I went, are you actually going to ask me how I am? And it was like, and this is not what he was like in a relationship. I wouldn't have stayed 3 years if he was. But it was like he was in shame so heavily that, and shame is meant to make you feel so bad about yourself that he had no capacity to think about anyone else. And so it was like he was acting like a victim, like it had been done to him. And yes, you're right. Every time I got a reply, I was like, God, I'm even more turned off. God, this is really off-putting. And it's why in that month where he was texting me, there was no part of me, like my friends, my therapist was so concerned that I was going to reply. And I was like, there is no part of me that wants to reply, because what am I meant to reply to messages about you and how awful it is for you and how your life has gone upside down? What about my life? And so I see what you're saying about getting to that point of anger. What I'm more saying is, do you have to get to that point? Like, do you have to touch the fire that many times? Because at the end of the day, if you're touching the fire that many times, you've ended up with a burn on your skin. Like,
I think we're talking about 2 different outcomes from not texting. So what you're saying is, if you just don't text and you manage to not do that, there will come a point where you no longer want to text. And I agree. If that is an option, go for that. That sounds great. For me, that has never been an option. If I get in the mindset, don't text him, don't text him, don't text him, just don't text him, it'll build and it'll build and it'll get big. And then eventually it'll come out somehow and I will text him or get back together with him, because this whole thing has been built into this forbidden area. Like, it's a big thing you're like restricting yourself from. And I will eventually then do it because of that. Can I give you an example?
Yeah.
I have 2 examples. One is, I did the thing, don't message him. Do not message him. So what I would do is I would keep, and I would try to find it before this because I wanted to read, because it's so pathetic. I couldn't find it. I kept like a note.
Wait, a pathetic message you sent someone?
No, worse. I kept in my notes app. Every time I wanted to message him, I wrote it down instead of sending it to him.
That's a great coping mechanism.
It was a big old list. But I'm so glad I couldn't find it now because it was so embarrassing. They were really like, it was like, I'm on the bus and I just saw 2 squirrels and they seemed so happy in their simplicity. And all I wanted to do was take a photo and send it to you.
So Sofie as a rom-com writer.
Because maybe you're my squirrel. Right? That's shit. That's shit. I went to see Lion King, the musical, and there were so many kids, and they were just so happy, like they didn't know that life could hurt yet. And all I wanted to do was share that moment with you. It was that. hundreds of messages. And then I miss you, and I'm angry with you, and fuck you, and all those things, right? And I was very like, but it became almost like a thing, like I'm going to put it into the document of beautiful thoughts I've had. And if all of that ended with like, when I got drunk, there'd be a phone call. Eventually, I was like, no, I need to get out of this. And I sent him the whole file.
Wait, sent him
the whole thing. And you know what? What a disappointment of a man. Because he was just like, okay.
Okay, but what would you say to being sent a document? I'm sorry, that's a normal response.
No, but it wasn't just that. Like at that point, we would already like started talking again. I was falling back into it. Like I was like, oh no, maybe there's still something.
I don't mean to compare you to my ex. But my ex told me in one of our final phone calls, I've been keeping a journal that's addressed to you. And I said, no, journaling's great. Address it to yourself.
Yeah, that's you.
And was
like,
about
a letter.
Can I send you
or a manifesto?
This book? And I said, no, please don't.
No.
So you basically sent your
the difference is
ex a book of all these thoughts, late midnight thoughts. I have a journal too. I just don't send it to people.
Listen, at this point, I'd already like restarted the whole thing. So what happened was, it was like April, not this April, a long time ago. I was younger, a lot younger, stupider. It's around March, April. And then I kept the silence until I think October or November. And then I had like one little like a bad night, and I was like, oh, let me just reach back out. And then we started talking again. Oh no, maybe it can work itself out, blah, 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 blah. And then we ended up sleeping together because I was like, I'm cool. We can just like have sex and it'll be fine. And then of course I fell madly in love. And then the next day, like the morning after having tried to be really cool about it, I was like, do you think that maybe we could get back together? And he was like, no. Because I kind of already said no back in April. So no. And then I was like, okay, I can't keep doing this. So then I sent him, I said, these are all the texts I wanted to send to you since March, April. Here you go.
Okay, that makes more sense.
It wasn't like an attack out of the blue.
But what do you
my weird squirrel thoughts.
But what do you think you're teaching yourself when you continually put yourself in the hands of someone who has hurt you in the past?
Oh, but it doesn't feel like a choice. That's the thing. In the moment, I feel like I don't have a choice. It's a compulsion. It's an obsession.
So you're going back to this idea of like basically cookies. Like if you compared it to eating disorders.
Yeah, it's an addiction.
And actually you get taught if you want to overcome restriction, you actually have to have an excess of it in the house so that you know, because it's the whole thing of I don't trust myself around cookies. Yes. And so you let yourself have all the cookies in the house, and if you continually tell yourself there are always going to be more cookies, don't worry, there are more cookies. What you're talking about is essentially the psychological thing of don't think of a white bear. And if you ask someone to not think of a white bear, they will think about a white bear. So if you're asking someone to not think about texting your ex, you're going to think about texting your ex. Yeah. Even think
the more
about
you
just
try
your
to
ex.
restrict yourself, the more it becomes this like, ooh, I want this. Now, latest ex found out, complicated story, blah, 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 found out that I was not the only one, ended it, right? About a month later, so we lived in around the same area of London, and I had to go to the hospital quite quickly, appendix issues. And he would live nearby, and I was like, oh. And there was two things. One, he lived nearby. I did need help. Two, there are other ways of getting help.
Call me.
There are other ways of getting help.
I would have taken you to the hospital.
But there was a part of me that was like, ooh, I have an excuse to message him. So I took it, and I said, hey,
okay, I've felt that.
I know we haven't spoken in a month and a half. I really need someone to get me these, like, a charger, whatever, right?
That's an intensity bomb if I've ever...
Sure.
I'm dying of appendicitis.
Sure. I'll take it.
Please come.
I'll take it. And that's the mood I was in. I was like, I'm dying. He was then like, oh, I'm actually, like, doing something. I can let me get back to you in a couple of hours and I can figure something out. And then he didn't. So I ended up having my friend come from North London to fucking Peckham to get the stuff for me. And by the time he was like, oh, then eventually he was like, oh, I could maybe come by tomorrow morning. Is that okay? And I was just so like,
I'm off by it. Yeah.
Oh God, what am I doing? What is he do? What is this? This is so like pathetic and no. And I just like didn't reply to him. And he sent like a few more like, are you okay? And I was like, no, I'm not. Like, I'm so away from this. And there were a couple of months later where I was like, oh, I saw like a thing I really wanted to share with him. And I just did immediately. I was just like, click. I saw this thought of you. And then he was like, ooh, that is really nice. And I miss you. And I was like, it was so, and I think that's the reason why the squirrel guy, sometimes I still think of him, where this guy, which was a year ago, out of my head completely.
But your argument is essentially, if you send the message, you think about them less.
Yeah.
But actually,
it's
for
more real.
some people,
it's a real
you
person.
send the message and you are fantasizing about whatever their response is. Because, yeah, fine, if their response is off-putting or a turn-off, but what if their response is everything you've ever wanted to hear? And then you can let's say it's a paragraph, you have a whole paragraph to build whatever fantasies you want in your head with that. That's the danger.
Okay.
And that's the risk. It's a high-risk way of figuring this out.
But then the fantasy is going to be there regardless. If you don't send it or if you send it, you're still going to be deluded about who they are, right?
I mean, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about my ex. Maybe that sounds ridiculous, but like when I'm turned off by someone, I don't think about that person anymore. So texting them... I mean, the reason why I blocked him was every time he sent me a text, he would pop into my head and I wasn't thinking about him when he popped into my head. So then he got archived. And when he carried on texting, which I call my archive, my WhatsApp graveyard. And then when he carried on texting, because you still see that number one. I mean, you put them in the archive and you still check if the number one is there. Then I was like, no, you actually just need to be blocked. You don't get that access to me. A big part of it is access to me. Another thing is boundaries. And then the third reason why I do it is I believe that everyone has a weak version of themselves and a strong part of themselves.
Yeah.
So my strongest, most empowered version is probably me on stage giving a panel. Like, that's my favorite thing to do. Or live TV. My weakest version is 2 a.m., lonely, drunk, crying.
In the archive.
She in the archives.
Yeah.
And also, like, trying to find whatever I can on social media for a guy who, by the way, has no social media. So then I go via, like, the friend of a friend to try to see something. That version of me will text my ex. But if the version of me that's very strong and empowered and feels good at 10 o'clock in the morning has already deleted his number and I have no number to text, then I can't do anything about it. To the point, actually, this is a ridiculous story. I don't think I've ever told this.
Go on.
I once did text an ex 2 years later because it took me 2 years to find his number again. And I found it in a screenshot of a WhatsApp media. And there were multiple times in those 2 years. But why I actually think that was a really positive relationship in my life is because I renegotiated it. I wasn't going back to try to get the same relationship from this guy. I went back to get a more casual thing. And because I didn't want more, it was actually him who was shocked and surprised by it, if that makes sense.
Which you wouldn't have been if you'd texted him every single time you'd wanted to. Three things.
And it was 2 years.
3 things. First of all, when we talk about texting your ex, we are talking about texting an ex that you left. Like, they might have fucked it up, but you were the one walking away. Because when we're talking about them texting you, no. Like, if you're the one who fucked up.
What's the difference?
Oh, the difference is, if you've said, leave me alone, and they then keep texting you, that's a big no-no.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, like, if I cheated on my ex and then he left me,
yeah,
I'm not saying text him.
Okay, so basically the fact
people's
that ex
boundaries.
continued to text me, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, no, we're not doing that. So, I mean, when we're the one who left, we're the ones who can go, yeah, I miss you. I'm just to say that's a difference. 2, just a little side note. The most recent one where I would just text him whenever, and I just lost all interest. I did the thing. I blocked him because he wouldn't leave me alone. I blocked him, archived him. He came to my house, rang the doorbell, and I was like, I opened it. I was like, what? And he was like, well, there was no, like, you blocked my number and there was no way of contacting you, so I didn't know how else to contact you. And I was like, well, that means you shouldn't fucking contact me. Couldn't believe it. I was so shocked. Anyways, third thing, Do you know, and I'm going to say this wrong, Schrodinger's cat?
Ish. I'm not very good with that one. What's that one?
So there's a cat in a box.
Oh, does the cat exist whether
Is
you
it
can see in the
is it alive
box?
or dead? Before we open the box, the cat could both be alive and dead. Right? That's Schrodinger's cat.
Yeah.
What I'm saying about this whole thing is open the goddamn box and find out. Where if you don't text them, you don't know.
I'm saying leave the cat in the box. You don't like cats anyway. Go away.
Well, if that was the case, you wouldn't be wanting to open the box. But you want to open the box. You're curious. You have thoughts about the cat. You're thinking about the cat. Open the box. See, oh, it's dead. Okay, walk away.
Have I swayed you at all?
I believe that there are people who, if they just don't text the other person, eventually it'll go away. And if that is you, don't text them. But if you have my brain and you will not give up, just do it.
You
Get it
don't
out
think
of your
there's
system.
an avenue where like you just delete the number and you stop thinking about them?
Oh, you're wildly underestimating how easy it would be for me to find everyone's contact information immediately. Because then it would be even worse. It would be 2 a.m. and I'm texting their friend to say, oh, did you have his number? Because for some reason I lost it. Which is even worse.
Yeah, that is worse.
It's
don't publicize your embarrassment.
Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook Messenger. There's ways to get getting in touch with people. As I said, the guy turned out outside my house. Like, if you want to get contact with someone, because I have it with his social media, where in the beginning I was like, I'm going to block him on all social media so I can't go and look at what he's up to. And I would have these like, oh, I'm not going to check. Oh, I wonder what if he's saying something
But it's
smart?
the only way to
what
move
if he's
on.
saying something incredible? Then I went and looked, and I just let myself look every time I wanted to look. And every time I was like, oh, is that all he has to say?
So when do you stop looking?
When I stopped caring.
And that just naturally happens for you?
Because
We are
every
very
time I
different
checked,
humans.
it was boring. There's a reason we're
In
not
summary,
a thing.
If you have my brain,
You can either be a Michelle or a Sophie.
and if you have my brain, do not text your ex. If you are more like Sophie,
Text your ex.
I'm
That's a
so
good
glad we
solution.
spent an hour debating this and have the exact same conclusions that we walked into this conversation
No,
with.
I do think there are people like you who can do that. And it would be the right choice. As I said, this is not for everyone.
I don't think I would move on if I knew I had that. That's my restraint.
You'd get so bored of them. Because what I feel like we have in common is that once they fucked up and they're out.
Oh, when I'm turned off, I'm turned off.
Yeah.
And so quickly, so
Yeah.
instantly.
So then there's like this little like bit of you that's like, ooh, but isn't he nice? And then if you entertain that and go, is he? Try it. You very quickly go like, oh, no, he wasn't, was he? No, he wasn't. And then you want it less the next time, because you're like, oh, God, been there, done that. That's so boring.
You've swayed me a little bit. You've added a little dash of nuance and complexity into my very absolute statement.
That's all I wanted.
How
And you couldn't take that from a thread?
I know, every time someone leaves me a hate comment now,
meet
they're
up
going to
with
be the
them.
next co-host on
Yeah.
my
I
podcast.
like that as a concept.
Where can people find you?
SofieHagen.com. I have a newsletter, which is like my main thing. And
You're
then
doing a tour?
Instagram. Tour's over. Just
Oh.
ended. Oh, I'm doing like extra dates in Paris, Cork, Dublin, Copenhagen, Belfast,
So you're doing a tour.
Harlem. Yeah, but it's not really. I'm doing gigs in other places. It's
For a
not the same.
layperson, you're doing
Alex-
a tour.
I'm touring all over Europe.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for
Congrats.
coming on.
Thank you for having me, Michelle. Where can we find your stuff?
Oh, they know.
I'm just trying to be a good co-host.
Thanks.
And where can we find your stuff, Michelle?
Thanks for being my
You
co-host.
wrote a book.
Thanks for being my first co-host.
Yay!
Yay.
But not the last.